The government censorship apparatus might be repackaging itself to survive the Trump administration. We'll expose a secret war Mitch McConnell has been waging on Donald Trump. And a migrant caravan races towards the United States to breach the border before Inauguration Day. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the Chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Wednesday, December 11th. What's the future of the State Department's Global Engagement Center? With its congressional authorization set to expire, the GOP is celebrating its likely shutdown, but does the center have a loophole? Here to unpack this for us is Blaze News Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson and Gabe Kaminsky. He's an investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner. So Gabe, can you tell us a little bit about the Global Engagement Center and why it's going to be shutting down?
Yeah, so the Global Engagement Center is an office housed within the State Department that works with the likes of the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, and other agencies. I believe I joined this program prior to talk about it. And the reason this office is so important is that myself at the Washington Examiner and other reporters, including Matt Taibbi through the Twitter files, had reported extensively on how the Global Engagement Center was involved in efforts funding outside NGOs that have worked in conjunction with social media platforms to suppress speech over the last several years. And so this major development that you were just referencing there is that the Global Engagement Center, which started in 2016, had an 8-year authorization. And until our reporting, there really hadn't been scrutiny on their activities, but we've really peeled back the curtain on their ties to suppress speech. And that has led, including other flurry of lawsuits and congressional oversight, that has led Congress, members of the House, Republicans to basically say they're not going to vote to reauthorize the Global Engagement Center, which means that barring them changing course, it is very likely that they would shutter in the new year, and they are planning to reallocate those employees to other agencies.
Gabe, it's a remarkable story. I mean, I love the fact you mentioned this first comes up with Taibbi in the Twitter files. You've done work on it. You guys have been targeted by the State Department, basically, for that work. You've been on the show before. Taibbi wrote a nice piece for Frontier about walking into Twitter's offices, our magazine, about walking into Twitter's offices and what that was like in the beginning. They had no idea what they would find. And I had occasion to think about this just because I was looking at this video series we haven't released yet, but we have sort of some drafts of, that's going through, walking people through the Twitter files. And my editor, I think, ends on the Global Engagement Center, sort of being discovered as behind a lot of this stuff. And now we're in a new world. I mean, I'll have multiple friends. We'll have friends at the State Department. And they're changing, and they actually are breaking and scattering to the four winds. So 2 points and your response. One is, obviously, if you thought that everything was fine, everything going on was fine out there, right, these days, then you got to explain to me, well, Matt, Gabe, you guys are on the right, and you're exaggerating all these things, and this exists to counter misinformation. If that's true, why are they all scattering this stuff to the four winds all of a sudden, right? It certainly looks as appearance of guilt. Like, why aren't you saying, no, we're going to stand strong and counter Russian disinformation, damn it, right? There's something to that. I don't know what if anyone out there who previously maybe thought this was fine is attacking them. And then number two, and probably more important is, does this mean that this all goes away? Or where are they scurrying off to? Because we should rightly be very nervous about exactly where they're going.
Yeah, so to address your first note there, I think that's super important because basically one could frame it perhaps as an admission of some sort of guilt. The State Department has faced significant scrutiny from this, not just from conservatives, from free speech liberals. And so basically, the Global Engagement Center had vowed to not to no longer fund the NGO that I had reported they supported, the Global Disinformation Index, which has blacklisted conservative media outlets from advertising dollars and still does so, by the way. And I think this is part of a broader pressure campaign that was launched. The National Endowment for Democracy, which is funded by the State Department, they also supported the Global Disinformation Index and NewsGuard and other entities that have worked to, in the minds of Republicans, suppress speech. They also vowed to no longer support some of these NGOs. So there was a whole pressure campaign against these groups. And to your second point, which I think is super significant, and that's how we should be thinking about this, is what is this going to look like in the future? And so there's a whole lot of employees, I believe over 100, who work at the Global Engagement Center. To be fair, some of those people probably double dip in other roles at agencies. The Global Engagement Center works with various agencies. Where are they going to be in the future? Is that going to be outside non-governmental organizations that basically seek to pressure the government to adopt policies to thwart alleged disinformation? Or are these sorts of employees such as James Rubin, who runs the Global Engagement Center, or Leah Bray, who helps to run it, who's heavily involved in these anti-speech efforts? Are they going to be going to other bureaus within the State Department, Department of Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure, CISA, another agency? There's a whole lot of agencies. And so the Trump administration's OMB, you would presume, and other agencies are going to be trying to track this because these are the same people coming into this administration now who are saying that they want to track federal spending and target some of these partisan programs, were the same people who are raising significant concerns over the GEC and other agencies being involved in speech suppression. So I'm definitely going to be interested in trying to track where these people end up. And if it's at other agencies, presumably the Trump administration is going to be looking at that in conjunction with their broader effort to with DOGE.
Yeah, change is coming. Gabe Kaminsky, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Matthew, and we see change all over, right? We're talking about the State Department, and FBI Director Chris Wray came out and said that he actually announced he's going to be resigning. There's change all over DC right now.
Yeah, I mean, these are incredibly important things that are happening. When the shift is enormously important, it's basically an acknowledgement that we were playing dirty pool, that people like Gabe, before it was damn them for pointing this out, we're going to come after you, right? And now it's, oh, actually, we're just going to go home. There was nothing to see here. We're actually going to disband this entire effort. I'll see you later, right? I mean, how much more opposite can you get? Times are changing.
We're turning the lights on. Everything is going to come to the surface. Don't go anywhere. Our own Julio Rosas will explain the trouble brewing down in Mexico after the U.S. elections. Stay tuned. Well, this Christmas, don't settle for anything less than the best on your table or under your tree. Good Ranchers is here to bring you the gift of high-quality, 100% American meat that's sure to make your holiday unforgettable. Right now, their Christmas special, you can subscribe to any of their meat boxes or seafood boxes and get a free 10-pound spiral cut holiday ham to complete your family feast. So whether it's for your family gathering or as a gift, this is the kind of holiday cheer that everyone will love. And speaking of gifts, Good Ranchers has a brand new gifting page, and who wouldn't want a box of premium steaks delivered right to their door? There's no stress, no guesswork, just amazing food that's guaranteed to impress. This Christmas, skip the lines at the grocery store and give the gift a flavor you can trust. Visit goodranchers.com, use my code Jill, and claim your free spiral cut holiday ham while supplies last. Make this holiday truly special with Good Ranchers. Goodranchers.com. American meat delivered. Earlier this month, Todd Bedsman told us migrants in Tapachula felt defeated by Donald Trump's victory. However, Blaze Media national correspondent Julio Rosas spoke with migrants in northern Mexico, and they're telling a different story. He joins us now to discuss this. So, Julio, what have you heard from the migrants that you've been speaking with in northern Mexico?
Yeah, so right now I'm in the state of Oaxaca, and it is interesting, right? Because different parts of the country, the migrants are in a different part of their journey. And so every single person that we spoke to in Oaxaca, they all said that they're obviously disappointed that Trump won the election. They obviously wanted Vice President Kamala Harris to be the president. But they said that even despite that, they're desperate enough and they're praying that they'll still be able to get to the United States. And so, at least in this part of their journey, they're still going to move ahead with trying to reach the U.S.-Mexico border before January 20th. And I even asked them, well, if you don't make it to the border before January 20th, before Trump officially becomes president, what are you going to do then? They still said that, well, we're just going to see what happens because there's no going home for us. The vast majority of those I spoke to were from Venezuela, Central America as well. So there's still a lot of people, not as many as when the Biden administration was in full swing, but there's still a sizable number of people who are still trying to reach our border.
Julio, what is their impression of the risk to them? You said they're willing to come anyway. So what do they think they're risking? Is it just to be deported and then try to get back? Do they between a rock and a hard place, you say, it sounds like, because they can't go back. So what do they think is going to happen to them when Trump is in office?
Well, one guy said that they're praying to God that Trump will have a change of heart. I think at least for us, I don't think that's going to happen, right? Just because of the seriousness of the problem with the border crisis. Because the main difference now is that obviously the incoming Trump administration has taken a hard stance, not just against the migrants, but also the Mexican government. And it does appear that the Mexican government is playing ball, at least for right now. And that's an important distinction, because whenever caravans were broken up, even as recently as this year under the Biden administration, Mexico didn't deport the migrants from Mexico. They simply broke up the caravan, dispersed them through the rest of Mexico, so that the optics of a caravan appearing at once at a single part of the border did not happen, because that obviously would make the Biden-Harris administration look bad. And so Trump is now really saying, we're not going to do that game anymore. When you disband a caravan, you disband them completely, and you don't let them continue in smaller groups to reach the U.S.-Mexico border. So it remains to be seen, and this is something that the Trump administration needs to be keenly aware of, and I think they are aware of it. But they definitely need to make sure that when a caravan in the coming months and in the coming years is broken up, it's because they're removing people from Mexico and not allowing them to reach the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yeah, so let's look ahead. Let's foreshadow this, because you're saying right now that people they're still going to try and come across the border and hoping that Donald Trump is going to have a change of heart. We don't think that's going to happen. But what do you think it's going to look like? Will there be more migrants, in your opinion, trying to make their way from southern Mexico all the way up to our border before we do get Trump inaugurated in January 20th?
I don't think so. And it's because as we were traveling from the capital of Oaxaca to the eastern part of the state, which is where our interviews took place, our drivers were saying that even as recently as 3 months ago, the mountain roads going north, had a ton of migrants walking alongside the highway. And we didn't see that. We didn't see that until we got to the most eastern part of the state. And so I think that's just because, again, the rhetoric from Trump's campaign, and now that rhetoric has power behind it, because he is going to become president next month. And that's the key difference, right? Because under the Biden-Harris administration, not only were they telling the migrants that it was going to be the easiest way for them to come into the country illegally, but also they'd be able to stay in the country, at least for the time being. Now, we have people like President-elect Trump, we have Tom Homan, the incoming border czar, Stephen Miller. They're all putting out the message that not only are we going to seal the border, but if you get into the country, we're going to deport you. You are going home. And that is it's a very stark difference from what has been happening, almost going on for 4 years. And that's the big change that the voters wanted. And that's why, a big reason why Trump won in November. And so we are starting to see that effect, that desired effect from American voters now happening, because yes, there are still migrants obviously trying to make their way through Mexico, but it appears to have, those numbers have appeared to be lowered dramatically enough to even where locals are saying we're starting to see a difference from even a couple of weeks ago.
So Julio, you're there now. Can you tell us what Mexico is actually doing? Like when we say Mexico is cracking down, right? I mean, those are pretty abstract words for Americans to hear. are they going to deport people themselves? I mean, we've seen the videos of hundreds of thousands of people right within Mexico. Are they going to send them elsewhere? I mean, what exactly are they doing to crack down, quote unquote?
So there are immigration, National Guard, state police checkpoints as you get closer to Oaxaca City, because that highway does eventually to Mexico City, right? And then obviously to the rest of the country. So I think that's one reason why the migrants that I spoke to, they still have that determination to try to reach our border, because they haven't gone through that gauntlet yet. Unlike the migrants that Todd spoke to when he was in Mexico City, because obviously that reality, that stark reality of how much harder it's become is a lot more clear to them. So I actually wouldn't be surprised that the people that I spoke to, if they make it that far, I wouldn't be surprised if they, being harassed by Mexican officials and even the criminal organizations, I wouldn't be surprised if then at that point they decide to go home. And so I think the numbers will thin out even more. And I think that's kind of the approach that Mexico is taking, where they're basically going to try to tire them out and holding them in certain places, making sure that they have travel papers, whether they get them or not. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing more of now, to where it's less window dressing and actually more action, where they actually hold people and then they just hire them out and wait for them to just give up on their own, which obviously is that only goes so far. But then that's why it's good to have a new administration, to where if they do make it to our border, they're not going to get in illegally like they have been able to for the past 4 years.
Julio Rosas, we appreciate the update as always.
Of course. Thanks.
Matthew, it's great to have Julio down there and doing the reporting there from Mexico, bringing us the story directly.
Yeah, no, we're going to hear a lot more from him in the coming days. There'll be video and obviously articles on the website, and we'll have him on the show soon. We're just talking to him before the show about this. It's a really important trip, because you actually do need to go down and see what the heck is going on. It's kind of a mystery, to a lot of us, how exactly this works. And now here, hopefully the end, we can, we can see what's going on and help put pressure on people to do the right thing.
Well, when we come back, Chris Bedford will unravel the mystery in D.C. He'll explain Mitch McConnell's plot against Donald Trump. Coming up. Well, everyone knows that college is a major investment, so it's important to do your homework. And you want to find a school that shares your values, but who has time to dig through all those websites and find what really matters? So I'm excited to share with you an online resource that does it for you. It's ChristianCollegeGuide.com. This online directory gives you over 250 Christian colleges, like it's a one-stop shop. And like any other college guide, you can visit the basics. You'll get the acceptance rates, the tuition costs, the academic majors. But what makes ChristianCollegeGuide.com special is you can use this guide to learn about a school's faith traditions, its campus policies, and its spiritual life. All the things that are going to show you what the college's true character actually is. You'll find answers to over 150 questions for every school that they profile, making this the definitive guide for Christian higher education. And the best part is it's absolutely free to the public. So go to ChristianCollegeGuide.com and create a user profile and get started today. It's ChristianCollegeGuide.com. Mitch McConnell may no longer be the Senate Majority Leader, but is he still waging war on Donald Trump? Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford wrote about this in his latest Beltway brief and joins us now to discuss. So, Chris, I mean, come on. How is McConnell still going up and trying to fight Donald Trump?
Well, Mitch McConnell's interview this morning, which Rebecca covered, kind of lays it out. He thinks that MAGA and the populist foreign policy agenda that is being pushed by Trump, by Vance, by Tulsi Gabbard, by Pete Hegseth, is equivalent to those people who ignored the Nazis in the 1930s. It's a pretty insane rhetoric to be getting from who just a few weeks ago was the head of the Republican Party in the Senate. And despite his rapidly failing health, despite persistent now rumors that he might even have to retire soon because of that health, he's spending these last weeks, months, or years fighting back against Donald Trump. But he's also not someone who likes the limelight. He's completely content to simply exercise power from behind. And even though he's no longer Senate Majority Leader, he has a lot of de facto power through the committees. He's in charge of the very influential Rules Committee. He's going to be in charge of the Defense Appropriations Committee. But he has a lot of power just de jure through his years of being there, his influence among those senators, many of whom, from John Thune down to Joni Ernst, are used to taking his advice, who have proven to be McConnell loyalists over the years. So when he whispers in people's ear, hey, why don't you go after Pete Hegseth? You don't want that, do you? Why don't you go after this or that? Well, they follow. And when they do end up falling on their sword, like James Lankford did when McConnell convinced him to push this immigration package, this disastrous immigration package over the summer, well, then he's nowhere to be seen. And it's kind of wild. You read the DC coverage, you hear coverage of Joni Ernst. You see her getting attacked. Back during the Lankford stuff, you heard a lot of coverage about Lankford, but rarely do you ever see McConnell's name mentioned. And that's just, they're taking the bait from the previous majority leader and minority leader. Those reporters kind of doing his bidding because behind the scenes, he's the person.
Chris, I wonder about how we get past McConnell in a way, because, people use the phrase cast a long shadow. I mean, even as he sort of fades away, and the influence is there, and these are almost, like you say, his proteges, people have listened to him. On the other hand, sometimes things can change faster than people realize. So what are your thoughts about how Republicans deal with his influence moving forward? I mean, it clearly is waning, we can say that. But do you have any thoughts about how this will be navigated, by, say, people like Senator Mike Lee and others, right? And people in between who are moving more in the lead direction? What should they do?
Well, right now, the one person the limelight's going to be on is John Thune, who was longtime McConnell acolyte and loyalist, who now has to prove that he's going to be his own man. He's given some interviews somewhat to that effect, saying that he's going to push through Donald Trump's nominees, that those people are going to get a vote and they're going to be approved by the Senate, as is the complete and total standard of the last 50 years of DC politics. Presidents get the cabinet that they want, with very few exceptions. At least for the president's party confirming them. I think there's 2 exceptions in the last 50 years of a president's party rejecting someone. So that's going to be someone of the limelight's on. And I've got a piece I'm working on for around the Christmas holiday, but I'll lay out some of the stuff on how to actually get rid of McConnellism. One of his more powerful, one of his great abilities to spread influence in Washington, D.C. is his influence network that he creates through patronage. Mid-level McConnell staffers are throughout Washington, D.C. power circles, whether it's in the Senate or the House, or often in lobbying and outside groups. And that's a patronage network that only ought to be allowed to thrive if it's actually in accordance with what the Republican Party is trying to do. For years now, I would argue, but definitely now, it is not. But in order to actually really affect this sort of change, McConnell's going to have to push, I think, and come out of the shadows, which he might end up doing. If he becomes a Mitt Romney type figure, or even more radical than Mitt Romney, because usually Romney, despite his bluster, did vote with the GOP the vast majority of the time. If McConnell really does work to try and undermine Donald Trump at every turn, as he signaled he will start to do, then they'll actually start to see some spirit in Washington to start saying, no, we're not hiring your guy. No, we're cutting off your guy. No, your fundraisers can't get in here. The network that they have right now, the ability to walk into offices because they used to work for McConnell, that is something that will allow McConnellism, as it currently stands, to potentially outlive Trumpism. You need to have a series of carrots and sticks. So when you're a senator who is with the MAGA agenda, or you're talking about former administration people with Trump, you need to force other companies to hire them. I think we've talked a little bit about this here. It seems kind of swampy, and it certainly is. But if you're a lobbying firm who wants access to Republican candidates, Republican senators, and decision makers, then they're going to want to look at your roles just like Democrats do and say, well, who have you hired from the Democrats to say Pelosi's office, or from the Biden administration, from the Obama administration? If you don't have those people on your rolls, then you're not going to be able to be talking to us. And that sort of swampy transactionalism is actually really, truly how you gain and maintain power even after you're gone in Washington. And it'll be important for a lot of the populists to kind of get on board with that. And I think more and more as it matures intellectually and in its understanding of power, you're going to start to see that from the Trump people.
Yeah, I just hear this and I hear McConnell has a very large web that he has there in DC, and the MAGA Republicans are trying to fight it out. But what we do know is that the MAGA Republican is right there in the presidency, right? On January 20th, Donald Trump is good enough right now to be named the Time Person of the Year from their magazine. And so he's going to celebrate by ringing the bell for the New York Stock Exchange tomorrow morning, according to 3 people that are familiar with the plans, according to Politico. So what do you make of this whiplash, though, that we see from Trump? He was a democracy-hating Hitler, and he was a convicted felon out there. And now he's going to be the Time Person of the Year.
Once again, although, of course, it's worth mentioning the Time Magazine of the Year doesn't always go to people that they like. I think Hitler won it a few times back in his day, and they'll try to excuse it as that. But Trump's resurgence is completely different from his first arrival on the scene. When he first came, it was a shock, and people wanted to hope of it as an aberration. I read an article by an English columnist earlier today that referred to Donald Trump in 2016 as a symbol of American decline with the spray tan and the 80s look, something that was not taken seriously by Europe. You didn't see that at all when he went to Notre Dame in Paris, however. They realized that as far from a symbol of America's past and a last gasp of this country, he was a symbol of the future for this country and for a lot of leaders in the West who are the populists who are starting to rise. People are starting to realize that this is not just something they can push away, something that will last 4 years. This is something that now has the majority of Americans, having long considered who he is and considered who the Democrats are, supporting. And they're dealing with similar issues across the entire Western civilization with different populist leaders who are coming forward and rejecting the last 30, 40, 50 years of liberal hegemony that we've had to deal with and the decline that it's brought with it. It's a much more mature movement. And I think even if he'd been reelected in 2020, we would not have seen this sort of reaction that you're getting now in 2024 with him returning. One, you've got people like Elon Musk. It's no longer just Peter Thiel. You've got major CEOs of top companies saying this actually makes sense. You've got people who are traditionally liberal donors. He's essentially brought around the smartest people on the planet, and they are supporting his administration and his ideas. The intellectual heft and the seriousness which they bring to this after 4 years in the wilderness really sharpened what he's up to, what he's focused on. You have J.D. Vance now waiting in the wings as opposed to just a couple of governors and potentials. This movement in those 4 years in the wilderness has really matured, and that's something that world leaders and domestic leaders are really going to have to deal with. And I think you've seen it in some of the reactions. You don't see quite the screeching in the streets. Black Lives Matter's moment is over. They can call for vigilantes in the streets of New York City, but for the second time now, because they came out during Obama, that murderous movement is on the fringes. It's on the out. When Google puts out its ad with a man dressed as a woman complaining about the color of their skin, that is fringe. That is weird. The American people have pushed beyond it, rejected it. Right now, you've got the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who, despite his pedigree, is no culture warrior, has been much more of a people pleaser, out there saying that the National Defense Authorization Act is not going to fund sex surgeries for minors. And the Democrats who come out and defend it are on the peripheral. They're not actually getting the momentum that they used to get. Like we talked about last night, AOC's removed her pronouns from her bio. Penny is innocent. There's a real actual shift. And I think it's part of an acceptance that this movement has popular support and intellectual grounding and can no longer just be dismissed as an irritable aberration.
Gosh, it's almost as if the adults are back in the room. I love this point.
I even shaved for it, Matt.
Oh, hippie no more.
I need a haircut still. Although
Same.
I shaved my beard just in time to get stuck in the side of the Beltway in 40-degree freezing rain. I think that beard, which is why I come to you today dressed as 70s Sean Connery. I just came in the door after fixing that tire, but we have to deliver the news to Blaze News tonight.
I was admiring the 70s Sean Connery. I think O.W. Root would agree that that's great. It's a great look. Look,
Merry Christmas.
This point you make is valid, and it's something I just think about a lot now. And it's what a different world we live in. I mean, I keep on just looking around, realizing this is a completely different universe than before November. The last 4 years are completely gone. The landscape in every sector it's completely different, right? So, we don't have a ton of time left, but in the last question here, where are we at now in the process in D.C.? I mean, there's denial, right? I mean, where's the process now where it really starts to become apparent? And like you're saying, they're not messing around. Like, these are serious people coming back in town with a plan. Where's D.C. at in this new landscape?
Well, right before paternity leave, I wrote about how the last holdouts to this new change and the sea change in the American electorate and the broader civilizational consciousness was the Republican Senate. There were a lot of people there who really did feel like they were untouchable, that they couldn't be hurt, that they have elections every 6 years, they get to do things at their own pace, and they can completely ignore the will of the American people on this. And well, sometimes that's actually a good part of the system. In this case, they were reading from the completely wrong songbook. And this battle over the last week and a half with McConnell acolyte Joni Ernst really highlights that, and her falling, and figuratively, and at the same time, McConnell falling literally, and the failing health of the last serious opposition to Donald Trump from within his own party, I think is where we're headed. What we're seeing over these next couple months is the battle for, we already know who won the presidency, but for who controls actual Washington, D.C. Senator J.D. Vance was able to make a really big impact, an outsized impact in his few short years as a junior senator. And he's bringing his team, for example, to bear, people who are experts. And they're also, they've got a maturity about them. Whereas previously conservatives, I think, made a lot of foolish decisions in Washington. They would write press releases about all the money that they returned to the Treasury, when in fact, Congress is not the spender in Washington, D.C. It's the executive branch. Congress should double its budget and double its salaries and get top-notch people who are not afraid to use power to actually try to change the federal government into positions. And that's what they're working on now. And hopefully that reawakening and that comfort amongst conservatives with wielding the tools of government, the weapons of government, to actually try to establish themselves and not just tinker around the edges like we have for decades, but make real changes and defend them. That's what we're starting to see. And I think it's going to be a Merry Christmas, Matt, and a Happy New Year.
We'll be watching for it. We'll be watching for Hippie Bedford, too, to see when we get a haircut here for Blaze News tonight. Thanks so much.
Sometime next week, I promise. And you can actually read my article in our new magazine, Frontier, that starts with just such a thing. When my hair got so long that even my wife stopped defending it.
That is perfect, Bedford. We'll catch you later.
See you then.
No promises on the 5 stage of grief, but we will unpack how the bathroom policy triggers the left more than sex offenders running for office. Just ahead. A nuclear blast devastates Los Angeles, throwing the nation into chaos in Angel Studios' upcoming film, Homestead. You can see it in theaters December 20th. And amid the chaos, an ex-Green Beret joins the prepper compound, and love grows, truths arise, and a community comes together and unites. This movie is packed with all the tension and moral dilemmas, and it's a story that cuts to the core of what it means to survive. Homestead explores the humanity behind the apocalypse. You can pre-order your tickets for a chance to win a $300,000 giveaway, which includes 1 full Bitcoin, a fully furnished tiny home from BoxHouse, and a custom Polaris OHV by Sparks Motors, and everything else that you would need to start your own homestead. You can pre-order your tickets for a chance to win now at angel.com/Jill. That's angel.com/Jill. And we'll see you in theaters this Christmas season. Just how divided is the nation over transgender issues? Representative Nancy Mace was allegedly attacked on Capitol Hill by an LGBT activist. Here to break it all down for us is Rachel Bovard. She's the vice president of the Conservative Partnership Institute. And Rachel, Mace is over here being targeted for her proposed bathroom legislation that mandates, crazy now, that people use the bathroom of their own biological sex. But out of everything that Congress does, why does a bathroom policy provoke this violent response?
It's fascinating to watch. And just to remind people, the reason that this is an issue is because there is, for the first time, a transgender member of Congress, and this issue has come to the fore. So the fight that every mom is having in her public school has now reached the Capitol. But to your point, the transgender activists are not necessarily calm people, as you can see. They are pushing their agenda radically. They're aggressively, even physically so. And I think it's a real issue, especially when you're attacking elected members of Congress. That rises to a level that we haven't seen before, although we've seen it on the left multiple times. They attack members of Congress, they attack people on the streets when they feel their agenda is threatened. And that doesn't bode well when you talk about the side that talks about the future of democracy. This seems to be a threat to democracy.
What do you think the future is in Congress on this issue? Do you think this whole incident and everything that's come before it, is this helping people grow a spine, or is it still sort of all up in the air? What's going on?
Well, it's interesting because it's the first time they've actually had to deal with it, right? Mm-hmm. Up until now, at the federal level, it's been rhetoric. It's been, we're going to introduce this bill, or this is what we think. And you kind of saw this play out when Speaker Mike Johnson was asked about it for the first time at a press conference a couple of weeks ago. He kind of equivocated. He said, we're here to treat everyone with respect. And the grassroots response was bombastic, frankly. Not disagreeing that everyone should be treated with respect, but the issue is, no, we are not going to say, use that as an excuse to allow biological men in women's restrooms. This is where you have to take a hard line. If you're taking a hard line on anything, it should be on protecting the rights of biological women. And within hours, I think, he was walking it back, and he said, no, actually, what I mean to say is biological women are the ones that are going to be allowed to use their own bathrooms. So in some ways, it's actually, I think, good for these guys to actually see what their constituents are up against, because, like I said, moms are dealing with this in public schools. This is something that you've had to deal with on sports teams and in private organizations. And so now watching these members have to deal with it on a personal level, I think is actually good as a spine stiffening exercise. And it's also good for the voters to see kind of where their members actually stand outside of just rhetoric.
Now, Rachel, let's compare and contrast some things on the right versus now what we're seeing from somebody on the left, a former congressman, Anthony Weiner. He's filing to run for office for New York City Council, and he was convicted of sexting a minor. Now, I look at that and say, okay, one of these things is very bad, right? And the other one is Nancy Mace is out here. She's the one getting accosted. But Anthony Weiner is just, what? Is he going to be welcomed back into this public life?
This is the party of Bill Clinton. This is the party that has no problem, rehabilitating these people as long as they are on the left. Jeffrey Toobin, CNN anchor, who's done unmentionable things that we will not discuss, still on CNN. I mean, it's outrageous, the double standard that exists here. And it's blue washing, I guess is one word for it, right? They just have no problem accepting these people back into polite society, no matter how bad their foibles. And I think it's horrific to some extent, but I think it also should give the right a little bit of courage when they're fighting back against basic things, like, again, protecting same, biological sex bathrooms, when this is the party that protects literally child groomers. So it really should give them courage, frankly.
So, yeah, I mean, on Weiner, it is hilarious that this guy is still around. I mean, there's a name I haven't heard in a long time. And how is this even happening? But it begs the question, like, why would people not be out there, as Jill's suggesting, if they're going to accost someone, right, or get in someone's face? Maybe it's people who actually go after children, I mean, what a sick society we live in where that's fine, and you're not supposed to mention that Mr. Clinton has been on a certain island and plane, whatever. So let's move on. Let's move on to something more positive. Chip Roy, Representative Chip Roy is reportedly making a bid to lead the House Rules Committee. Obviously very powerful. Most people don't know what it does, regular people, but it's a very, very powerful position in the House. What are the odds that he succeeds at this, and how do you kind of see the scene?
Well, I do think it's a tremendous opportunity for conservatives to just give a basic high-level overview of the Rules Committee. Nothing comes to the House floor before first going through the Rules Committee. So the Rules Committee structures debate on all bills that come before the House floor. They effectively choose and vote on what bills come to the House floor and who gets amendments and what they are. So it is a tremendously influential position. And Chip Roy, I think, has proven himself worthy of the position. He's been on the committee for the past 2 years. He's as sharp as a tack. He's got a great, brilliant policy mind. But even more than that, I think he understands how power moves in the House, and he's committed to conservative principles. And you want someone like that in charge of the Rules Committee. Conservatives have been shut out of the Rules Committee for this reason for years. And so I think Chip mounting a bid to lead it, I think, is almost a statement that conservatives have arrived to some degree in the House. As you know, they'll still always be the minority of any majority of the Republican Party, but I do think Chip is such a savvy player that I think he could pull it off. I think it'll be an uphill climb. He'll face a lot of resistance from establishment Republicans who do not like this Chip Roy's politics, because Chip Roy wants to upend the established ways of doing things in Washington, and he wants to do it for conservatives. But again, this is a threshold moment for the Republican conference. What type of politics do you want? Because Donald Trump was just elected to disrupt the system in Washington. If you actually believe in that and you actually want to support him in that mission, Chip Roy is the person that you need to lead the Rules Committee.
Rachel, last question. I guess it's DC Day for us. We had Chris Bedford on, although we have him on pretty frequently since he is our senior political editor and DC correspondent. But we asked him the same question. I'm curious your thoughts. I just can't get over what a sea change, we're living in. I mean, it's almost to see the situation we went through over the last few years in this oppressive, actually very terrifying for a lot of people paying attention. And all of a sudden, it's all gone. The entire landscape is completely different for everything, in every sector of our society. This isn't an exaggeration. I think it's really true. Doesn't mean we do well with it. But I'm curious, in D.C., what is it like there? Are we through the denial phase yet? Is it still like a shocked silence? Like, how do you read the room when it comes to sort of the uniparty in Washington grappling with this changed reality?
DC is always a lagging indicator of where the country is, and I don't think they've quite. It's interesting because the first Trump election was the big shock. It really did sort of stun the city. But then I think the bureaucrats and the uniparty got very skilled at sort of blocking Trump, waiting him out, pushing his agenda to the side, sort of head patting it, but doing nothing. This time around, I think the shock and awe is a little bit greater because the base is in on what's happening. They saw what happened in the first Trump term, and they are not prepared to witness it again. And so I think especially in the Senate, in the House too, the House is always a little closer to the base, but in the Senate, there's an awareness that there hasn't been before, that they don't have. The smoke-filled room operation isn't going to work as well this time. It's not to say that they don't want it to. I think there's an inertia in the Senate to pretend Donald Trump doesn't exist, but that's not going to work this time around. And you're seeing it already with the response to some of his nominations. You saw people like Senator Joni Ernst step out and say, well, I don't know if I want to confirm Pete Hegseth. And the response was swift and severe, and there were immediate, meaningful discussions of a primary challenge, and her hand was slapped so hard that she, kind of withdrew and said, okay, well, I'm probably going to support Pete Hegseth. And I think those type of responses are slowly waking the Senate up. I do think that the Senate Republicans are going to be Donald Trump's biggest challenge, but I don't think that they're going to be able to pull off what they did last term, which is effectively ignoring and sidelining him. Not only did the base respond, but he also has J.D. Vance this time around, who's as savvy as they come, and I think will effectively work in the Senate, and that's going to be a big help to Trump and his agenda.
Strong, swift responses against the establishment is what we like to see. Rachel, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Don't go anywhere. When we'll be back to wrap up the show right after this. Things are changing. That's the theme of today's episode, Matthew. I couldn't be happier, actually, after today's episode, right? Yeah, we get the Mitch McConnell against Donald Trump, but we're actually winning some of them, right? As Rachel Bovard was saying, the Joni Ernsts of the world are getting squashed very quickly. This is exciting to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a while for my black-pilled heart to slowly, heal. But I do feel like, as I said on Twitter, that nature is healing. I mean, when Fox News is posting our stuff
Not just
with
our stuff,
attribution,
your tweet, your post on X.
That's Al is back right with the world. Like it's nature is healing. With Ernst, it's a great example. What her point was so important today. It was Joni Ernst. Usually, the establishment kind of does its thing and walks its way. And Rachel's term was, she got slapped so hard on the hand. It's like, actually, I've considered, and we've talked to Pete, and everything's fine.
We had another meeting. We worked it out. It's okay.
Yes. So, who's winning now?
Well, it's I'm the captain now, and it's MAGA that's in charge. It's conservatives that are in charge. I don't even know how to feel at this moment in time, especially when we look at something like Chip Roy, who could become, leader of the House Rules.
Yeah.
That is so incredibly powerful that if you don't know what that is, again, nothing can be brought to the floor without going through that. And to have Chip Roy's fingerprints on something before it gets there would be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, so the House is very hierarchical as opposed to the Senate, because there's less people in the Senate, so it can be more democratic. It doesn't need the sort of ordering principle. So the Rules Committee orders the whole thing. So hugely powerful. And as she said, that's another litmus test where certainly the pressure is on for someone like Roy to be in that position, as opposed to, the usual people. And really that's about someone who would care about it, right? And be good at it, wanting to take the job. And do we actually live in the world finally where, excellence is going to matter and purpose and principle are going to matter? Like, maybe we will for a little while.
What is this that you discuss? When we saw the FBI Director Chris Wray has announced his resignation, I just think of our FBI whistleblower Steve Friend and all the DEI and all of the crap that is encapsulated in the 7 years that Chris Wray has already been FBI Director.
Yeah, look, I mean, Ray leaving is, again, it's like, don't let the door hit you. Actually, let it hit you. Please, let me slam it shut. Get the hell out of here. And with the Global Engagement Center, right, people like him, they're just leaving. And so it is like, we got to get out of here now. And imagine Steve Friend and the people who are the suspendables, the people, Kyle Seraphin, people who are whistleblowers and persecuted at the FBI might be going in there to help clean things up.
We're going to ride these good times because we don't know how long they're going to last. And if you want to do that with us, be sure to subscribe to Blaze News Tonight on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps everybody else to go out there and find it. And we'll be back to break it all down tomorrow night.
Gonna front row seat to Draining the Swamp.
Yes, let's do it.